students always feel anxious, even though the analytic report is collaborative. It's long. Never given anything higher than a B to anything shorter than 13 pages in 12 years of teaching, 13 years of teaching. Typically it lands closer to the 18 to 25 page mark. Several students have written in closer to 30 pages in a group of 3, but still that's 30 coherent pages. Some of those pages are prefatory matter, which makes it a little bit easier, but still it's a lot of writing. Why, in a world where so few people actually want to read, it's been what I've said repeatedly as we go through this class, why would I ask you to write a, let's say, 13 to 30 page report? The answer is that the structure of a business report does not entail being read from beginning to end. Instead, the business report is designed to be A, skimmable, B, read selectively only in parts, and C, consulted rapidly in a meeting to keep everybody abreast of what's going on. What are some examples of this? Every report contains an executive summary. An executive summary is a 1 to 1.5 page summary of the entire informative contents of the report. Why is it called an executive summary? Because it's read by the executive. That this 30-page document is made skimmable and readable. It's got a lot of white space, got a lot of charts, got a lot of tables, got a lot of headers and subheaders, effective use of what are called intratextual features. Intra, inside, the text, textual features, like bolding, changes in font size, that help make the document skimmable, right? It has a table of contents and a list of illustrations at the front. These documents help people skip to the pages within the analytic paper that are most germane to them. Some people may only read chapters that affect their part of a corporation. The table of contents helps them find them. It always ends with a conclusion and recommendation section. The conclusion and recommendation section always comes in that order because the conclusions are the logical conclusions of the report, not the end conclusions. They are the conclusions you reach if you follow the logic of the data represented in the report as you move forward through it. Does that make sense? I hope so. Once you have reached a conclusion from the data, you can make a recommendation on what should be done next. That's why we end with the recommendations. And there are a whole lot of people who will skip immediately to the conclusion and the recommendations. And if they agree with it, slap you a mental high five and move on from there. And if they disagree, then retrace their way through the report to see where their opinion breaks or differs from yours. Lastly, the reports are filled typically with a handful of appendices. Appendices are information which are typically, again, only read by one subgroup of the audience who need extra detail on some portion of your report. If all of that information were put in the middle of the report, it would slow down the skimming process that I've described earlier, right? So, appendices help subgroups of the audience of your report go directly to the material that is most relevant and germane to them and their interests. The report begins with two things that help give it context for the audience. The title page, which students get wrong all the time. So here's my warning. The title page has 4 bits of information on it. The author, the title, the date, and the person for whom the report has been prepared. This helps someone recognize who has responsibility not only for writing it, but who had responsibility for commissioning the report. It also helps identify if I'm reading the wrong report right off the bat. There is a letter of transmittal on the inside. Why do we call it a letter of transmittal? Because as I transmit the report from myself to its intended recipient, it recontextualizes the report for that recipient. It says, here's the report you asked for on this topic. Here's a summary of the report for that you asked for. Lastly, the letter of transmittal in its body form also contains usually an offer to continue working with the person if it's been a productive relationship so far, and again an offer to communicate further based on a recommended path of communication, a phone number, an email address in that conclusion. I've called it a letter of transmittal. That's a little bit incomplete. As you might remember from earlier conversations, it might be a letter of transmittal or a memo of transmittal. If it's internal, it's a memo of transmittal. If it's external, it's a letter of transmittal. Right, you knew that. The report is long, and actually one of the hardest parts of the report is getting to figure out how Microsoft Word will paginate it for you. Headers, footers, and pagination are important in this kind of document, and I hope you'll figure out how to make those devices work for you. I also strongly recommend using the automatic table of contents feature in Microsoft Word. It'll make preparing the report a lot easier. And I hope if you have questions, you talk to me. The collaborative report is complex, not because it's cognitively hard, but because it requires coordinating a number of other students to work with you. And I will help you through that process if you ask.